The case against education. Why the education system is a waste of time and money. I'm Simon Harrington, and this is Bookmarks. Hello and welcome to Bookmarks. I'm your host, Simon Harrington. Few people would dispute that there's much waste in U.S. education, but a new book argues that we should dramatically cut spending on not just college, but the entire education system. In the case against education, why the education system is a waste of time and money. Bryan Caplan takes on the notion that education is an inherent good that improves the lives of individuals and society. Dr. Caplan joins us today to discuss the book. He's a senior scholar at the Mercatus Center and a professor of economics at George Mason University. He's the author of The Myth of the Rational Voter and Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. He writes Econlog, named by the Wall Street Journal as a top economics blog. He received his PhD in economics from Princeton University and his BA in economics from the University of California at Berkeley. And joining us to critique the book is Dr. Jill Robinson, an early career academician whose research focuses on opportunity structures for at-risk youth. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of California at Berkeley, a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and a PhD from the University of Maryland, College Park. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Caplan, in a nutshell, can you give us the thesis of the book?
Yeah, the thesis of the book is that there are really two different reasons why education might pay. There's the normal reason that most people think about, which is that you go to school and you have skill poured into you. But there's another reason called signaling, where you go to school to get certified. You jump through a bunch of hoops, you get stamps on your forehead saying that you are an excellent student, and then employers treat you better because you have convinced them that you have actually convinced them by jumping through all these hoops. The important difference for the individual, it doesn't really make that much difference why exactly it works, but for taxpayers and for society, it matters a great deal. So if you're going to school and you're actually learning useful skills, then you're able to actually contribute more to society when you graduate. But if the main thing you're doing is jumping through hoops, well, if everyone jumps through a lot of hoops, then employers just raise the bar for how much education they expect you to have.
All right, and Jill, how would you respond to Dr. Caplan?
I would say first I enjoyed reading it, and I think you raised a lot of points that educators needed to think about and consider with respect to credentialism and signaling, both of which have been around for quite some time. However, I would not argue that austerity is an educational policy. I do believe that austerity is a fiscal policy which focuses on reducing the deficit when the economy is already weak. However, I think the focus for an educator needs to be on developing opportunities in a just and democratic society. And that involves considering more than just the hard, fast rules and principles of austerity. It involves looking at individual experiences and understanding someone's family background, understanding the social and cultural and historical context in which people evolve and come to the public education system, considering all those purposes, doing a cost-benefit analysis, and then you either decide you're going to switch policies or make an argument for one way or the other. So I just felt that it didn't bring in enough of the context that individuals come with in terms of considering how to design an educational policy. It's not prescriptive enough. Austerity as a principle is not consistent enough.
Dr. Caplan, how would you like to counter what Dr. Robinson has to say?
Right, well, I'm all for admitting that the world is complicated, but at the same time, it's important to think about whether the complication matters in any particular case. So, here my story. My story is that a lot of the reason why education pays for the individual is not that it's producing social value, but that you're jumping through hoops. And so there's this zero-sum feature of it, where if you get more education and you make yourself look better, you're making other people look worse. I mean, one big implication of all of this is that suppose everyone had a college degree, what would happen? Well, if you really thought that people were learning a lot of useful skills, then this would lead to an economy where everybody's got a great job, or at least a good job. But on the other hand, if I'm right, the main result is just going to be that employers will raise their expectations. So you'll need to have a college degree in order to work at McDonald's or to be a janitor or something like that. Now in the book I do talk, there's a lot of evidence that this is exactly what's happened to the US economy over the last 70 years. There are many jobs that you used to be able to get with just a high school degree or even without a high school degree, where now you need some college or a college degree. And again, these are jobs like waiter or concierge at a nice hotel, where in 1950, if you said, I'm going to have a restaurant where the waiters will have college degrees, people would have thought it was crazy. It's like, good luck finding waiters with college degrees. Right. Now it's easy to do because we have had this proliferation of credentials. So and really what I'm saying and why I'm pushing for what I call austerity, say, look, if by greatly encouraging education, we have led to this world where you need a lot of education even to get a very basic job, if we would push it back down, right? We could go back to a world where you could get a good job right out of high school. Now, of course it makes sense to consider individual circumstances, but I'd say that's all part of what's going on here, is considering individual circumstances. Again, I'm not saying that there's one right path for everyone, but I am saying that pushing for a world where everyone has a college degree, I think if you can agree that that doesn't make sense, I'm saying, well, we're already halfway there, right, or a third of the way there anyway, and I think we should rethink that as well.
And I got to ask, besides the book and writing your ideas in the book, what are you doing anything constructively towards this end, or for your ideas and progressing them into society, I suppose?
I guess the main thing I'm doing is talking to people about it. So, I love talking to people. I talk to educators. I talk to the Department of Education, talk to think tanks. So, I am an ivory tower professor. I don't have a startup or anything like that. So, I guess the most practical thing that I do is I do homeschool my older kids. So I have my own view about the best education for them. But also, honestly, a lot of what I do is saying, well, here's the system. How can we game it? Right, so what is it we have to do in order to go and do well in the system? And, and I'm very honest.
You're saying you hear that from students.
Well, I'm saying, this is what I do, actually. Okay. I say, look, you're my kids, and let me tell you, the system doesn't work very well, and we could either sit here belly aching about how it's not fair, or we could figure out how to crack this system and make it work for us. And again, when I'm giving individual advice, that's always what I do for people, is I say, look, someone says, give me, I'm thinking about going to school, my first question, right, so what's your career goal? And then I'll tell them, well, is this the degree that you need for that or not? And if they say, well, I think I could do it without it. So, well, yeah, you probably could just teach yourself, but the world won't accept it. You won't be able to get a job with the knowledge that you acquire online. You need to go through this formal process, or else you're going to have a lot of trouble getting a job. So, and these are the kinds of things that I talk about in my book. And when I go and advise individuals, I just level with them and say, look, the system's not fair, but it's the world that we live in, so you're going to have to figure out how to cope with it.
And if I can just ask one more. So, obviously, we got into this situation where you feel like the education system's not fair, et cetera, et cetera. How do you think we got to this place? And how do you think we got here?
Good intentions is how we got here. At any point in time, it's easy to see there's someone who would have done better if they got more education, and say if only taxpayers would have made that possible. Right? In any one case, there's a very visible person that you've helped, and so it makes you feel good to help that person, and then they go, and if they succeed, then you can say, see, the system works. I always think about my best friend at Princeton, came from an extremely poor family. They literally lived in a log cabin they built with their bare hands, or I guess with saws, but a log cabin they built themselves. Right? So you see the very visible person that you've helped, and this makes people feel good, and it gets politicians like it, and taxpayers, voters hear about it, they like it. But then if we step back and realize, yes, but what if we do this for everyone, this is going to change the meaning of the degree. If you have a large increase in the degrees that people hold, the result isn't going to be the same as if you just help one person. If you help a lot of people, it's really like being on a treadmill or a rat race, where you need to get more education just to have the same level of same final result that in the old days you could have had with less. So again, like my dream, a world where you can get a good job right out of high school again. Right? And I say, here's the thing, we can have that dream again, but in order for that to happen, good people have to stop going to college. Right? You need to have good workers who don't go to college anymore, a large number, so that once again a high school degree says something about you and is impressive. Right? And that's the problem.
Okay. Dr. Ramos?
The operative word for me is we. And so when you say we, it sounded as if you were talking about you and your particular family. Well, if we expand that notion and we talk about we as a community and involve, people entire cultures of people, then we can start to talk about collective action. And so public education, in my mind, has never been just a personal achievement. It has always been a victory for a community, for a group of people. Even if one person from the community is the one who goes out and gets the Stanford degree or whatever it is, the benefit spreads throughout the community. And that is invaluable. That is why we need to keep public education, because there's a nation-binding effect to it. It keeps us coherent as a nation.
How about that? How would you respond to?
An extremely popular view, but the heart of my book, or lately, like everything that I write, is to start with popular views that seem like they sound so good, they're probably too good to be true, and then to take a look and see where they really are. So, like one big implication of my approach is that if the education level of the whole nation goes up, it will help the country economically less than if just one individual got that degree. So in the book I talk about research on this, and this is the standard view among people who have looked at the numbers, is that education is much less beneficial for countries than it is for individuals. Not what you're saying, where it actually, there's these extra benefits to the country. It's the other way around, where if one individual in a country like India gets another degree, they make a lot more money. And yet, as they've increased the amount of education that they have, it seems like it's very hard to see what the economic payoff would be. And this is generalizing over a lot of countries, but this is the kind of thing that you want to do to see. And again, if a view sounds really good, this is where I say, well, we should stop and calm down and pause and then ask, is it as good as it sounds? It's one thing, of course, we're all inclined to believe things that sound nice, but there's a lot of things that sound nice that are just false. Binding us together as a nation. This is one where there may be something to it, but if you look at the numbers, it's a lot more complicated than it seems. Like one thing that's pretty striking is more educated people seem less patriotic by most measures. So it seems odd to say that the education is binding us together if the longer you stay in the system, the less bound you feel.
So what about, let's take your argument for the face value of it, but what about the counter argument to it that it's a necessary economic evil for our society, with all the people that buy books out of the system, and the pencils and paper and this, that, and the other? I mean, it's an economic reason why it's in place. How about that?
Right. So basic economic point is you could do something else with those resources. So the classic example in economics is, can we afford to go and reduce the size of the army after the war? Because what about all the employment and opportunities that army creates? And the standard economist answer is, well, think about all the stuff that we could have instead, the non-military goods. So in general, it's not a good place to think about the people that are currently benefiting from a system. You need to actually say that the investment is worthwhile, because you could always do something else. Right? Again, the people's like, well, what else could you do? Like almost anything. Right? There's so many other possibilities. This is just like a more general economic point. But anytime that there's an industry that shrinks, people tend to think, well, that's it, and there's going to be permanent unemployment, horrible problems forever. And yet, look at where we are. We're back down below 5% employment. Almost no one works in agriculture anymore. Very few people work in manufacturing, and yet still unemployment's very low. And what are people doing? Other stuff. Right.
And I would love to respond. I am very comfortable looking at the numbers. And a matter of fact, that's one of my second pieces to my critique, is that there doesn't appear to be a methodological framework for understanding what is and is not a valid criticism of education. If you look at the NAEP data, and the NAEP stands for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a test that's comes from the U.S. Department of Education. And it's a pretty standard, popular test. But if you look at the progress of public schools from the past 20 years using that data set, public schools do okay. Not great, but they do okay. And I'm saying that's enough cause to not abolish them. I think we can improve some things, but I also think that there's just not the rigor that we need in order to justify the prescription of abolishing schools.
Yeah, so again, the heart of the book is just about cutting, not abolishing, which would be going way beyond the data. But saying that there's been some marginal improvements in literacy and numeracy of kids, that can be fine. But like really that only goes to the parts of education where I agree with most people, which is like schools teach some literacy and numeracy. I've never denied it, totally fine with it. But what about all this other stuff that you're highly unlikely to use in adult life? And again, which also we know from studies of adulthood, people generally forget. So the data is interesting because usually when we do want to evaluate what students are learning, we go and we test them at the end of an academic year or maybe at the end of the program. And that's really not the relevant measure from the point of view of actually almost any contribution to society. What you want to do is look at what adults know. Because there's one very big problem that all educators face, which is that students forget most of what you teach them. So in the book, I focus a lot on studies of adult literacy, adult numeracy, adult knowledge, different subjects. Where again, so for literacy and numeracy, at least you can say about 2/3 of adult Americans are pretty good. But at the same point, there's so much else going on, right, which usually doesn't really get discussed because it doesn't fit the story of the schools as these skill factories where students are being transformed into productive adults. And again, that's really what I want to talk about. What about all this other stuff that's going on?
So is it just a matter of overspending, or is it a matter of the subjects they should not be there, these particular subjects?
So it depends, but so one that I'm very staunch on is I think that it's worthless to go and have a foreign language requirement in K through 12 because essentially 0 people actually become proficient as a result of studying.
But why is that not simply more of an argument that the way it's being taught is wrong?
Well, here's the reason. So we're spending kids are spending 2 or 3 years studying it and getting near 0. If they were spending a few weeks and getting near 0, then I could see let's put more effort into it or try to do it better. If you're getting almost nothing out of 2 or 3 years, that's when I say it's time to throw in the towel and admit that what you're doing is just too hard to accomplish. You could go and double the productivity. There are here's a general point. If you put a lot of effort in and it doesn't work, that is a reason to give up. It's not a decisive reason. It's still a good reason. And it's something that we do in real life all the time. You go and you put a lot of trouble into a relationship, or you put a lot of trouble into a house, and then you think, wow, this doesn't seem to be working very well. This is where you say,
but you keep trying to plug the hole. You don't stop.
Sometimes it depends upon how hard you try. Sometimes you say it's time just to go and tear this house down, or just to rip out all the pipes and put in some new ones.
Or if you're truly interested in the gaps that are unacceptable, let's take the folks who are not learning a foreign language. Let's stratify that.
The 99.3%.
Yeah, let's
people that do it.
Look at it by race, gender, and ethnicity, and let's see who's not learning Spanish.
Well, if it's 99.3%, then virtually no one of any group is going to be learning it, and that's the actual number. Then there's the point of when do you actually use a foreign language in American society anyway? Very few jobs use it. Very rarely would someone use it for entertainment purposes. And then I also another thing to consider is just if there's someone that's been taking a lot of money from you and delivering no value for many decades, you shouldn't trust them. And this is my view of education in the U.S. It's been taking so much money from taxpayers for so long, delivering so little, being very reluctant to actually admit how little they're accomplishing, and then the solution is give them more. No, the most prudent thing to do in this case would be step one: we're going to have very large cuts because you're not delivering value, and if you think that you can do better, you improve first, and then we'll consider maybe restoring the funding after you demonstrate that you're doing your job.
I would just say that a fair assessment is going to bring in history, it's going to bring in sociology, it's going to bring in all the disciplines that help inform a framework. I wouldn't be using ordinary least squares. I'd be using a multivariate model where you can bring in different factors and you can partition the variance and you can begin to understand and attribute what actually is and is not working. But without that framework, we don't have that. And I think this book owes us an honest discussion and a commitment to looking at the whole pie of the educational system.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Our first question comes from Tammy Fuller. Why do employers require job applicants to have college degrees even though the necessary skills can be acquired without a degree?
So my story is a lot of what employers are looking for isn't actually the skills. Most of what's taught in school you would use on virtually no jobs. I think a lot of what employers are looking for is the credential as a signal of desirable traits that make them feel like they can train you. So, again, not just being smart and hardworking, but also a lot of it just being conformist. So in our society, you're expected to get degrees. If you're someone that doesn't have one, employers naturally are asking themselves, why didn't you get it? I mean, especially if they say he seems smart, seems hardworking, why didn't you have it? Does he have a problem with authority? Is he not a team player? So again, I think this is so much of what's going on is that employers are using the credentials to see, like really a certification, to see, can I trust this person? Is this person worth teaching? Is this person worth training? And again, I mean, really what we've created is this odd system where you have to spend 17 years in school to finally get to a point where you'll be trained to do an actual practical task.
Dr. Robinson, counters?
I kind of agree with some of that. I would just put in that in this country, I think the national expectation is that students should be competitive. And being competitive involves proving whether you're an A student, a B student, a C student, or however you want to differentiate yourself. So yes, there's a little signaling going on when I apply for a job and someone says, oh, you're a UC Berkeley graduate, oh, you're a UC so-and-so graduate. And they're genuinely proud of you, you know, and they encourage you. So I think that's more to it. They want to see sort of maybe where your alignment is.
A little signaling or a lot of signaling? That sounds like a lot.
Well, it depends what industry it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go with our second question. It comes from Matt Poole. Is critical thinking a skill that's acquired through education, or is it a talent? Either you have it or you don't.
Yeah, so I'd say that those are basically false alternatives. So like it can be learned, but it doesn't mean that you're learning in school. So again, there's a lot of research on this. The extent to which education does teach critical thinking. There are course classes that are called critical thinking classes where you can show that students improve on the critical thinking test between the first week of class and the last week of class. But that's not really what people are going for, right? They're going for critical thinking that you take away from the class and you apply to real-world problems. So when educational psychologists have looked at that, they do find that people with more education are better, but when they've looked at people in the first year of the program, the last year of the program, they find that their critical thinking seems very similar. So it looks more like people who had better critical thinking were more likely to have just advanced on to the next program. It doesn't seem like it's being improved very much. So again, that doesn't mean that it can't be improved, but it doesn't seem like it's improved very much on average in school.
I do think there's some innate qualities that you may have and some potential, and I think it can be honed. So I think it's a combination of both.
All right, and now it's time for 3 questions, where the reviewer asks 3 questions directly to the author. Dr. Robinson, go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Caplan, if you abolish public schools and credentials, what other forms of signaling might evolve or exist?
Yeah, I mean, again, like abolishing public schools is barely discussed in the book. I'm just talking about cuts. But again, the main things that are, so first of all, if everyone just had one fewer degree, then you can get basically the same rank ordering that you get now and just let people start their lives 4 years earlier. So that's the simplest thing, is just to go back to a time when a high school degree was to serve the same function that college does today. But again, there's a lot of other things, so like on-the-job training, apprenticeships. So there's plenty of other ways that it can be done. I mean, right now, high school seems to be set up to try to keep kids out of the labor force as long as possible. A lot of pressure on kids not to work. But learning by doing, and just by actually getting in and working your way up the ladder seems in most ways more functional. Certainly in terms of preparing people for what they're really going to do, it's better.
Second question, Dr. Robinson?
Okay, thank you. If we did end public schooling, what, if any, would be the social effects on local communities?
Social effects on local communities. So sure, why don't we go with this? So I think the main effect is just the parents are going to pay for it. Now distributional effects on poor families, and so that could be bad. Although of course there's a lot of philanthropy out there for people that want to do something about it. But again, the main thing I'm talking about is cuts. So again, you could either still have the system as it currently exists for younger kids, or you could have just a means-tested voucher for poor kids, in which case the distributional effects are barely there, or things may actually be better if you can use that voucher to get a better education than you're currently getting.
Okay, and you kind of covered my last question, which was what would be some of the economic cost of ending the public school system?
Yeah, so my view is on net, so on net I think there are benefits. I mean, I think the amount of signaling is so high that I think it would actually would be better if it weren't there. But again, that's a extreme conclusion that I defend briefly, but again, it's not really inherent to the book. But again, the main thing, if everyone had one fewer degree than they currently had, right? Just imagine that. That I think would be a big economic benefit. People would start their lives at a much earlier age, start adult life at an earlier age. Taxpayers save a lot of money, and if what I'm saying about the way that education works is basically right. It's not going to be a big de-skilling of the workforce. It'll just mean that you start learning how to do your job at an earlier age. Interesting, so since you're from England, so in England you normally go straight from high school to medical school. You don't have to do a 4-year degree in the middle.
Right.
Well, Americans think you have to do this. Do we really think that we get better doctors because you have to do 4 extra years in the middle? Right, or maybe there's just 4 years that are being wasted. And yet, of course, if you tried applying to med school right out of high school in the U.S., good luck.
Try practicing med school if you haven't had those 4 years of residency. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't work either.
All right, so and I actually have one more question. Mm-hmm. So you speak mainly in the book about the U.S. system and the problems where it's lagging. Mm-hmm. Who's a model in the world that we should be following in your mind?
So the least bad country that I know of is Switzerland. So in Switzerland, only about 10% of people have college degrees. And there is a much bigger system of vocational education where people are trained to do an actual practical task at an earlier age. So it's basically a system where you start adult life at an earlier age. And if you're in Switzerland, you'll notice, wow, they don't seem unskilled there. They seem like they know what they're doing, like they're highly competent. They also have plenty of national cohesion. It seems like on almost any measure you can think of, it's a very nice place, very functional society, and yet it's just one where education plays a much smaller role than it does in most other rich countries.
All right, last word. Any last words?
I would just say, consider Brown versus Board of Education and the social struggle that communities have taken upon themselves to gain access. Literacy was at one point illegal to try to teach black folks how to read. I just don't want to see a return back to anything that savage.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's very good if everyone learns how to read and write. Current schools do a pretty crummy job of this compared to what you might think they'd be able to do. But I would say that if you were going to just redirect the way that schools spend their money, I would say how about we put more into making sure that every high school graduate is literate and numerate before we go and pile on foreign languages and a bunch of other things that they're never going to use anyway.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Again, the book is The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money by Bryan Caplan. We'd like to thank Dr. Caplan for joining us to discuss the book and Dr. Jill Robinson for offering her critique.
Excellent.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Bookmarks. I'm Simon Harrington, and we'll see you next time.